Hi, Greg Alderman. Welcome to One Voice Board. Today, we're going to talk about principle number 2 of the principles of governance. Decisions are made by consensus. Now, in order to get into it, I want to invite you, whether you're by yourself or as a group, to pause here in just a moment and answer the question, how does our board make decisions? When you're ready, go ahead and push the playback, and I'll be here for you. All right, when it comes to decision making, quite honestly, the most important thing is not the structure or the rules of how we make decisions, but the principle by which we make those decisions. I learned this pretty early on, being exposed to different organizations that had rules for how large bodies made decisions, how gatherings made decisions. And most people are familiar who've done any kind of decision making at a board with Robert's Rules of Order. Boy, if you're like me, you've seen the abuse of Robert's rules. People using procedure to sabotage the process, people using procedure to rule by simple majority. Because let me tell you, in the Bible, biblically speaking, simple majority does not, did you hear me? Does not constitute the will of God. So what do we mean by decisions are made by consensus? I want to give you a couple biblical backgrounds to the idea and then give you a couple practical examples. First, think about this idea from 1 Corinthians 12. We're told that the church and the members of the church form a body. And in our understanding of policy governance, the head of the body, if you will, is Jesus Christ, but the board representing Jesus Christ. So the head needs to be in touch with the body, and they need to be paying attention to what's going on in the life of the church in order to make good decisions, which means we're listening. We're paying attention. We're listening, most importantly, for the voice of the Spirit. And when we come together in regular meeting and also executive sessions, we're sharing together what we hear. We're listening. We're paying attention to not just the majority opinion, but especially, I would say, the minority opinion. Let me give you an example of where this happens in the history of the church. I reflect often on Acts chapter 15. If you watched other videos, you've heard me talk about Acts 15 in relationship to other principles. Well, it comes into play exactly with principle number 2. Let me demonstrate it for you. The Jerusalem Council, there was conflict over whether or not these non-Jews could become Christians without having to follow the Mosaic law, without having to be circumcised or follow the purity laws. Could they be Christians? This is a serious question. And there was a lot of differing opinions. The majority opinion among the average person on the street, as well as the leaders at the Jerusalem Council, the majority opinion at the start of the meeting was, yes, indeed, these Gentiles need to become followers of the Mosaic law. They need to be circumcised and practice the purity laws. But when you read the account of what took place, the group gathered and they listened to one another. It says in verse 7 of Acts chapter 15 that they debated vigorously. They had sharp dispute. And at different points, Paul and Barnabas and Peter stood up and addressed the group. Peter in particular is noted first, and then Paul and Barnabas. And they reflected on Scripture. They reflected on what the head of the church wanted. And as they listened, get this is crazy in our modern day of making decisions, especially with what's going on in our culture. We literally have tyranny by simple majority in our culture. This constant battle to oppress one another by a 50% plus one vote. It is crazy. You can see the abuse of simple majority taking place right outside your door. Well, that's not what happened in the Jerusalem Council. They listened, and guess what? As they listened, they heard through the minority voice, the voice of the Spirit leading them, because they were listening and reflecting thoughtfully. That is what we want to see happening when we make decisions in the life of our church. So let me give you a couple practical examples of how this works. I want you to picture for me the difference between, for example, typical procedural decision-making apparatus and consensus. Robert's Rules of Order creates an adversarial approach to a problem. There are two or more groups trying to win the day, get their point across, and get their thing enacted by using procedure to stifle the other side and get the decision passed. But in consensus, the idea is not that procedure is wrong or that Robert's rules is wrong, but it's like a group facing the blackboard together, or our day, right, the whiteboard, as we verbalize and put up on that board every idea, and then we evaluate those ideas together. There's a great book, by the way, on this concept that I'm talking about that addresses it if you're interested in it. It's Getting to Yes. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, it's in the resources page, and you can find out where to look that up. But it's looking at the board, getting all the possible ideas on the board, and then discussing the ideas, their pros and cons, before we start debating for our favorite. Another picture is going back to 1 Corinthians 12. It's the body. It's us listening to one another, listening to the opinions being brought forth, listening to the reflections of the minority, speaking biblically about their opinions, prayerfully digesting these things, taking time in between meetings, because a lot of times we rush through decision making and try to get everything done in one meeting. I used to be guilty of that. Sometimes with consensus, you need to take time and slow down the process. You ever heard this phrase? So that you can go fast. Go slow to go fast and make long-term concrete decisions. Well, that's what consensus is seeking to lead us to do. Remember, it's a value, it's a principle, it's not a procedure. So what happens when you debate, you discuss, and there's still conflict? That happens a lot. It's happened on the boards that I lead. You know, we also talk about, and you can watch this video later, in Principle 3, that we speak with one voice. Speaking with one voice doesn't mean we had a unanimous decision. I think one of the great mistakes boards make is they insist that publicly they have to say the decision was unanimous when actually they stifled voices and forced people to vote in a unanimous fashion. That's not really healthy, actually. The healthy thing is to verbalize and get all those opinions out. But what happens if you have impassioned minority views that don't seem to be getting along and going along? Well, the board has to go slow enough to listen, digest, understand, and articulate the view of the minority group even better than they can. Once again, this is talked about in Getting to Yes, if you're interested in reading more about it philosophically. But the point for the minority group then is to ask the question, do they understand what I'm saying? Have they reflected on it biblically? Is there any biblical objection taking place here? And if not, can I go along with the group, with the larger group, even if I don't agree with it? You know, once people have been heard, quite often, they're willing to go along with the group if they believe that they've been valued and listened to and actually taken seriously. Consensus, making decisions by consensus, is not a magic pill, and it is not easy. But let me tell you, if you want to be healthy as a board, you will have this commitment, because what it does is it draws forth the truth in the meeting, not after the meeting. You see, too much of the truth for too many boards takes place in the meeting, after the meeting, in the parking lot, rather than face to face. And our goal as church board members should be to have the real things that are important discussed in the context of the meeting so that the whole body can hear it. You know, I have been a part of decision-making in church boards where the final decision started out as the minority opinion. I've seen it happen in real life. This works when you're committed to speaking the truth in love, by being honest with one another, direct with one another, and of course, respectful. And as my friend Bruce Bugby says, timely, so that you can be effective in your decision making. By the way, honest, direct, and respectful is another great resource you can take a look at. Hey, if you need help with this, you want to understand more about what it means to make decisions by consensus, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at greg@onevoiceboard.org.